Hey there, and welcome to the Event Crushed podcast. Each week, we'll be chatting about all things wedding industry, entrepreneurship, and how to crush it in life and business. I'm so glad you're here. Now, let's dive into this week's episode. Hello and happy Friday, or whatever day it happens to be when you are listening to this episode. I hope you're having a great week so far, and I am glad that you're back here tuning in. Today will be, I think, a pretty short episode just with you and me here. We're going to be chatting about ghosting in the wedding industry, and I have some thoughts on this that I have just been wanting to share. So there's been a lot of talk about ghosting online, and I see just quite a bit of chatter about ghosting, mostly from vendors who are upset that they got ghosted. And it's just an interesting conversation. And I think it's something that we all deal with, of course, like we all get ghosted from time to time. And so yeah, I just kind of wanted to have a conversation today about it and share my perspective with you. So that's what the plan is. And I figured before we really get into it, if you are unfamiliar with the term ghosting, I wanted to just kind of break it down for you. It's pretty simple. It's really just, I think the way that most wedding pros would define it is a couple reaches out to you and sends an inquiry for your services for their wedding, and then you respond, and then you never hear back from them at that point. So it can happen at many different points. It's not always in that very first touch point. It could be later on. It could be maybe you've been chatting with them back and forth through email for a while, and then they ghost you. It can even be after you've done a consult with them, and then they just disappear off the face of the planet and you don't hear from them, which is truly like a lot more painful. If you get ghosted after the initial inquiry, there's no real connection at that point. It's a lot harder to like be truly offended at that point because all they did was just reach out to inquire with you. But if you took the time to have a consult with them, and then you sent them a proposal, which, depending on what type of vendor you are, like it can be time consuming. And then they ghost you. That can be rough. And so I definitely know that feeling, and it's not fun. And so anyways, we're just going to talk about what ghosting looks like, why it's happening, and what we can do about it ultimately. What I really want to make clear is that ghosting is going to happen no matter what. And ghosting happens across all industries. It's not exclusive to the wedding industry, of course. We don't need to act like we're special in the wedding industry because we, get ghosted so much, or that it's exclusive to the wedding industry, because it is not. And I'm sure if you've worked in other industries as a business owner, you would have experienced this on some level as well. So here are some things that we can do to prevent ghosting. We want to make sure that when we're responding to that initial inquiry, we are being as clear as possible in our communication. We are giving the couple what they need and having really clear next steps. So, for example, if your goal is to get them on a call with you, then you would want to make that really easy for them. So include a link, like a direct booking link to your schedule with whatever scheduler program that you use, and just let them know, okay, here's the next step. Use this link to book a time on my calendar, and then we'll chat about your wedding. Just make it really, really easy for them. And if they're asking you specific questions in that inquiry, because of course every inquiry is so different. Sometimes they will share like their whole story and they're so excited. And so, and then they have various questions for you. Make sure that you're answering all of those questions in your response, of course. And don't think, I can just wait and go over all of this on our first call. Like if they ask you questions in the email, we want to make sure that we are answering those, with the exception of if they're just like, hey, what's your pricing? that's a little bit different. A lot of us have custom pricing. So if you do have, a range that you can give them or starting prices, I highly recommend just including that right there, not necessarily waiting to get them on the call to then share that with them. Side note, but I do think that having your starting prices or a range on your website is really helpful. And I think that if you don't have your pricing at all, and couples have no idea what you charge, and you're receiving emails like, hey, how much, is your photography package? And then you tell them, or, you respond in an email and let them know. Maybe you have like a PDF that you send with like a package guide. And so you tell them, these are the ranges and this is what it looks like. Maybe it's above their budget. And so then there's a good chance that they're just not going to get back to you, unfortunately. So if you're seeing that happen a lot, I would recommend having your pricing on your website. Again, it can be starting prices, it can be ranges. It doesn't need to be exact. For myself, I do have my starting prices on my website, but it is all very custom for my planning services. And so I can never just give somebody a quote until after I've had the consult, but I can give them starting prices. And I think that's very helpful just for people to know, is this even worth my time to talk to this person? I'm just really not into wasting my time or a couple's time. And so I think it's important to have those conversations before you get on the phone, just to like pre-qualify them. So anyways, kind of a side note about pricing, but I would say if you are getting ghosted a lot and you don't have your pricing on your website, that would be something to reconsider. And also something I think that's a little bit of a roadblock for people is if you have this very long canned email that is just full of information, and then you attach like a 20-page PDF to it, to any like incoming inquiry. I think that can be very overwhelming to couples. And I have found that if I keep my emails super short and sweet, I actually don't use canned emails anymore for inquiries, especially because I'm not like a super high volume business. I'm not getting like, hundreds of inquiries where I need to have it automated and I need to have a canned email. It's not that hard for me to sit down and write a personalized email to every person who reaches out to me. So I have started over the last year, just responding without even a template to start, just a blank email, and I just type out a response. And it's literally like a few sentences. It's very short. But my goal when somebody reaches out is to get them on a call with me. And so I just respond to their email. I answer any questions that they have. I let them know how excited I am. I let them know, if they tell me that it's at a certain venue that I've worked at, I, express oh, I love that venue. And, or, oh, I've been dying to work at that venue. I just make it conversational. I want to sound like myself. I don't want to sound like a robot or too professional. I'm a very conversational person. And so I want to come across the way that I am in real life. And so again, it's just a short and sweet email. And I just send a link to my scheduling calendar and I just let them know, hey, I'd love to jump on a call with you and your fiance to chat about your wedding, to share about, my services and my offerings and how I can help you. And I want to hear about your vision. And so yeah, let's jump on a call. And then I just include that link and it works really, really well. I will just say that. So I think keeping it shorter and sweeter and not overwhelming is essential. Again, couples, actually not again, I don't know that I've said this yet, but couples are reaching out to so many vendors these days. It's wild. Gone are the days of reaching out to one or two vendors. I mean, so many couples now are reaching out to several vendors in each category. Photographers, they might be reaching out to 4, 5, 6, 7 different photographers to just kind of price shop and check availability. And they think they need to reach out to a lot because they know there's a good chance that vendors could be booked on their date. And they know that there's quite a range in pricing. And so they just want to make sure that they're finding options that are within reason of what they're looking for. And so there's just more options than ever. And it's easier than ever to reach out to vendors. It's so easy to just have all their tabs open. And Heidi was talking about this in last week's episode about the marketing plans, how couples will have 20 tabs open and they're looking at everyone, all these different planners websites, and okay, this one does this and this one does this, and this one starts at this price and this one's over here. And, they're just kind of like comparing, but overall they all look the same. And so I think one way we can set ourselves apart is how we respond to that initial email. And again, if you're sending like this long templated email with like just all this text, I don't even know if they're going to read it. And if there's like a attached PDF with all this information, I don't know that they're really going to take the time to go through all of that. I think it can be very helpful, and I think it's great. And I also think there are certain like buyer types that would love that. Sam Jacobson, if you are familiar with him, he has a great podcast for wedding professionals called Own Your Business. And he talks a lot about the different buyer types. Anyways, he probably has a lot of great resources on this. I'm sure he's done a podcast episode about this topic if you want to just dig into it more. And he is a great resource. So definitely check out Own Your Business by Sam Jacobson. He has a company called ID Action Consulting, and they do all kinds of stuff like website design and website audits and copywriting and all that good stuff, like for wedding pros specifically. Okay, so moving on, beyond the initial email, there is another very important step that I'm sure you're aware of, and that is following up. So let's say you sent your initial response to their inquiry and you don't hear from them. Maybe a couple days go by, a few days go by. So I hope that you are sending a follow-up to them. I know that some people are like, oh, well, I don't want to chase clients. Like, why do I need to chase them down? If they wanted to work with me, they would have gotten back to me, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I get it. But at the same time, people are busy, like couples are busy. So there is a very good chance that they are still interested in your services, but they've just been distracted. They've been working on other things. Who knows? But the follow-up is essential. And again, if you feel like you're getting ghosted a lot, like ask yourself, well, am I following up? Like, what is my strategy for following up with people? Because if you're just letting it go after the initial inquiry, like you're leaving so much on the table. There's so much opportunity there for you. So that's an easy fix. Like just start following up and have a strategy in it. Don't just randomly make sure I'll follow up at some point. Like have a time frame. Like I'm going to follow up after 2 days. And then I'm going to follow up after 5 days, and then I'm going to follow up after 2 weeks or whatever you decide to do, but have a system to it and just stick to that. And I will say there's a lot of information out there on what is the appropriate amount of times to follow up. Everyone has like a different, strategy or different recommendations for that. But I would just say do what works for you, but definitely follow up at least a couple of times. Like don't give up at one. Because it's so possible that they, again, are just busy and that they are still potentially interested in your services. Plus, maybe there's a chance that they did start talking to another wedding pro and we're kind of moving forward with that person, but then, oh, just kidding, that person actually isn't available on their date anymore. So, I'm back to square one. I need a planner again. So you following up with them potentially can coincide perfectly with that happening. And these things do happen. Again, like I've talked about on the podcast, being top of mind with vendors, staying top of mind with couples is very important. And so if you just kind of pop in and just say, hey, I'm just checking in. I just, wanted to know if you're still looking for a planner. And then I also wanted to share, I don't know if you've heard of this or not. It's called the magic email. And I can't remember who recommended this to me years ago. It probably would have been 7 or 8 years ago, I came across this. It's called the magic email, and I will link the website down below in the show notes, but it's so extremely simple. And the idea is that maybe you've been following up with a potential client and you're not hearing back. And so it's kind of like a last ditch attempt to hear back from them. And so all it is, it's literally like a sentence. And I think it's totally fair to tweak this. When I've done it, I don't say it exactly like this verbatim, but I make it a little bit my own. But the magic email literally just says, since I have not heard back from you on this, I have to assume your priorities have changed. This guy who came up with this, he just shares a ton about the success that him and his clients have had in sending this email. And it's just really interesting. So it's something to try. I think another way you could you could phrase it, you could say, hey couple, their names, since I have not heard back from you on this, I assume that you have decided to go in another direction and you're no longer needing a planner or a photographer, whatever. You can customize it. But I think if you just leave it super simple and short and sweet, because if they haven't actually gone in another direction and they are still interested, but they've just been dragging their feet or whatever, I think they will get back to you at this point because it lets them know that you're well aware that they might have gone with somebody else and it's okay. Like you're okay with it. Like you're just kind of wanting to move on. And so you are trying to close that loop. Like you just want closure on it. And so I think this is a good way to get closure one way or the other. And I think that, yeah, like it just makes it clear to the potential client that like you've moved on, you're over it, it's okay. Because I know that sometimes couples, a few different reasons why ghosting might happen. We've already talked about some of them being, couples are busy. They might be reaching out to 3 to 5 or more vendors in each category. And I personally do not expect them to get back to every single vendor. Like, I don't think that's a reasonable request. And I know that some people do think that. And I don't know. I can see both sides. Like I understand how it might feel rude to just leave someone hanging, but at the same time, like they don't owe that to us. Like just because they inquired with us doesn't mean that they have to let us know. Is it like nice to know? Is it a nice thing to do? Yes, but people are so busy. And again, they're reaching out to so many vendors. A lot of them aren't even keeping track of the different vendors that they're reaching out to. And so it just becomes a lot. They get overwhelmed and they're like, oh my gosh, I need to move on with my wedding planning. I can't just sit here and spend time, letting everybody that I didn't go with know, because that could be like 20 vendors that they're then having to email back. And that can just be a lot for them. And again, I talked about earlier, there's just more options than ever when it comes to vendors. And so it makes sense that ghosting has increased over the years and that it just is a more common thing that we see these days. And then the other thing that I was trying to get at here is that some couples have like it's a real thing, like a fear of confrontation, like not wanting to hurt people's feelings. So then they just avoid it altogether and they just think, well, my non-response is going to get the message to them, but then I'm not having to like deliver this bad news. So that could be another reason that people don't get back to you is that, yes, they did go with somebody else, but they really just hate confrontation and they don't want to have to like break your heart. So they still break your heart, but they're not like personally doing it. They're letting the silence do it for them, which is sad. But I think it's easier for them to do it that way. And so that's why I don't get offended if I don't hear back from people, because there's so many reasons why, they might have gone with somebody else. It could be a budget thing. It could be a location thing. It could be so many things. And I am okay with it. And I think it's important to get to a place where you are okay with it. And I know it takes time. Like if you are newer in the business, it can be like just that, rejection when you're getting started, it feels really harsh. And I know that that can be really difficult if you're, in the first couple of years of your business. I promise that over time it will get easier. Like now it just kind of rolls off my back and I'm like, all right, like that wasn't my couple and that is okay. And the couples that are meant to work with me are going to find me and we just move on. Okay, so I want to go back really quick to the magic email because I forgot to say one thing about it. And that was just that a lot of times when we're following up, maybe the first one, we're just like, hey, I was just wanted to check in and see if you were still looking for a wedding florist. And I'd still love to meet with you. Let me know if you have some time next week, blah, blah, blah. Maybe our first emails kind of sound like that. And then if you, it's been a few and you're ready to do this kind of like last ditch effort, I think rather than just saying like, hey, have you gone in another direction? Like leaving an open-ended question that they then have to answer, which then feels harsh because then if they're like, yes, I picked somebody else, like again, that confrontation thing, they might not want to respond with that. But if you word it in the way of the magic email, like, I assume that you've gone in another direction, or since I haven't heard back from you, I assume that you picked a different florist for your wedding day. And I just feel like that is a lot easier to respond to because you're the one who's like saying it and then they're just agreeing with it. But if you say like an open-ended question, have you gone in another direction? Then it's, just that open-ended that then they have to respond with and like feel responsible for. And I don't know. It's just interesting. I think it has a lot to do with how it's worded. So anyways, another thing I wanted to touch on is that a lot of vendors complain about ghosting and it happening a lot in our industry, but also the reality is that ghosting can go both ways and it happens to couples too. I went down this whole like Reddit rabbit hole, which I don't go on Reddit a lot at all, but it was a thread of somebody complaining, like a bride complaining about a vendor that she had reached out to that had been like her dream vendor for like 5 years. And she was just waiting till she got engaged so she could book this person. And like initially it was going great and she had the date available and she was like, okay, I'm ready to book you. How do I pay the deposit and sign the contract? And then the vendor just like ghosted her. And it was just a sad tale. And then in the comments, there were many other people. And there was a separate Reddit thread where a vendor was complaining. But then in the comments, a whole bunch of couples were complaining about vendors that had ghosted them. And so I think it's important to realize that this is not just happening to us as vendors. It's also sadly happening to couples. And so, I mean, let's just ask ourselves, like, have we been ghosting couples? I hope not, but we can't really, we definitely can't complain about it if it's something that we are doing ourselves. So I'm sure that you're not doing that, but just something I wanted to mention that it does happen in our industry on both ends. And then it also happens like laterally in our industry from vendor to vendor, which is a bummer because you think, we should know better because we don't like getting ghosted by couples. But it does happen, especially I would say, planners are the ones who are probably reaching out to vendors most out of all the different vendor types. So, planners are checking availability on behalf of their couples. And so I've just, again, heard from various sources that planners will reach out to photographers or caterers, whoever, and check availability for their couples. And then they just never hear back from that planner. Like they kind of, in a way, get ghosted by the planner. And again, we just need to ask ourselves, like, are we doing that? Are we having clear communication with our vendors as well as our couples? And so I think ultimately the goal is that there's no ghosting from vendor to vendor, from vendor to couple, from couple to vendor, all these different scenarios that happen. We can always improve and do better. And ghosting, honestly, though, I don't think it's going to go away. And so that's why I think we need to get better about how we react to it, how we deal with it, and how we approach it, because we can only control so much, right? Like we can control on our end how we're responding to inquiries. We can control how quickly we're responding. That's an important piece of this too. The quicker you respond, the higher your chance of hearing back from that couple. I know there's a statistic that says some large percentage of vendors that respond to the inquiry first are the ones that get booked. And so if that's not enough of a reason to like make you want to respond immediately, which I know is not always possible, but response time is important, especially it's always important to get back to our couples in a timely manner. That could be a whole other episode. I know that me and my VA Darcy talked about that a bit on her episode earlier on. And just vendor response time in the industry is a little bit of a struggle. And I understand, during busy wedding season, like I'm in right now, it can be harder to get back as quickly as we want to. But if you're leaving people hanging for days or weeks at a time, like that's a real problem. Anyway, sorry, just a little bit of a tangent there, but ultimately, I don't think ghosting is going to go away. Couples have access to so many options these days, and there's sites like The Knot and Wedding Wire where it's just like one click and it'll just send an inquiry off. And so it makes it so easy. And I see a lot of people trying to educate couples. Like I've seen some blog posts from a vendor geared towards a couple, please stop ghosting, and kind of trying to educate couples to stop ghosting. And as much as I think that's a nice sentiment, I don't think that that's going to do anything, sadly. I don't think it's going to stop. I think it's going to continue. And I think, again, that we can only control how we respond, how quickly we respond. And beyond that, like if they don't get back to us, that's their choice. And then we follow up. And again, we do what we can do, what's in our control, but we cannot control other people. And so we, at the end of the day, we have to just be okay with it and to just say, okay, it's true. Like if they did want to work with me, then they would get back to me. But it does take the extra follow-up because people are busy. And so it's worth following up. It's worth your time. You will be surprised at the responses that you get. So if that's something you're not doing right now, I highly, highly recommend it. Another resource I wanted to mention is Alan Berg. He has a podcast and some books and all kinds of good stuff. His podcast is called Wedding Business Solutions. And yeah, he's just a great resource for sales in the wedding industry. And he talks specifically about getting ghosted and all of this stuff. So I'll link his podcast and some of his stuff down in the show notes as well. So I think that's pretty much what I had for today. Let me know if you have any thoughts. I'm always curious what listeners think about different topics that we discuss. So if you agree on my thoughts on ghosting, if you don't agree, I would just love to hear from you. Shoot me an email, shoot me a DM on Instagram, and we can just keep the conversation going. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and we will be back here again next Friday. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the Event Crushed podcast. I hope you found value in this episode, and if you did, please consider sharing it with a wedding industry friend. We also hope you'll consider leaving a rating or review for the show to help other listeners find it. This podcast is edited and produced by Ace Sound Design. If you're looking to elevate your audio experience, their info can be found in the show description. As always, thank you for listening, and please connect with us on Instagram if you haven't already. Now get out there and crush it.